Volume 1 of a two-part book by William Edgar called Christian Apologetics Past and Present speaks of an Italian Dominican theologian and philosopher, Saint Thomas Aquinas, as one of the most influential medieval thinkers of Scholasticism. He was without question the most important and influential figure of the medieval period, and his intellect and influence are almost unmatched in the history of the Church, and certainly so because Saint Thomas Aquinas, an authority of the Roman Catholic Church and a prolific writer heavily influenced by the Greek philosopher Aristotle, single-handedly brought about a paradigm shift, merging the theological principles of faith with the philosophical principles of reason. Thomas Aquinas was born in Roccasecca, central Italy, between the years 1224 or 1225. When he was about 5 years old, his parents placed him in the Benedictine monastery at Monte Cassino and completed his primary education at Benedictine House in Naples. It was during those years that he studied Aristotle's work, which would later become a major launching point for St. Thomas Aquinas' own explorations of philosophy. But when Monte Cassino became the center of war, his parents withdrew and enrolled him at the University of Naples. Unfortunately, on the part of his parents, while studying at the University of Naples, Aquinas came into contact with the members of the Dominican order, and going against the will of his parents and their opposition, he became a Dominican friar in late April of 1244. When his family found out, they felt so betrayed that he had turned his back on the principles to which they subscribed that they decided to kidnap him. Thomas's family held him captive for an entire year, imprisoned in the fortress of San Giovanni at Roccasecca. During this time, they attempted to deprogram Thomas of his new views, but Thomas held fast to the ideas he had learnt at the university and eventually went back to the Dominican order following his release in 1245. Aquinas continued to pursue his studies with the Dominicans in Naples, Paris, Cologne until he was ordained in Germany and went on to teach theology at the University of Paris. And with the aid of his tutor, St. Albert the Great, Aquinas earned his doctorate in theology. He proved to be an admirable scholar and was very modest that his classmates sometimes misperceived him as being dim-witted. When he completed his education, St. Thomas Aquinas devoted himself to a life of traveling, writing, public speaking, and preaching. However, and arguably the most interesting point in Aquinas' life came at a time when, at the forefront of medieval thought, was a struggle to reconcile the relationship between theology, faith, and philosophy, reason. People didn't know where to draw the line between their revelation and the information they observed naturally through probing with their minds and their senses. And there was a view known as the theory of the double truth that claimed that knowledge from revelation and knowledge from observation and reason were in direct opposition to each other. Aquinas bitterly rejected that view, arguing that both types of knowledge came from God. He believed that revelation could guide reason and prevent it from making mistakes, while reason could clarify and demystify faith. And through his works, St. Thomas Aquinas sought to use faith and reason to both perceive and ultimately prove the existence of God. And in one of his pieces of writing called the Summa Theologica, Aquinas articulated what we have famously come to deem as the 5 theistic proofs for the existence of God. Here's how those proofs can be basically summarized. The first way is the argument for motion or change. He argued that a being that is moved or changed must be moved or changed by something that is extrinsic to such a being, or something outside and beyond such a being. And in addition to that, the extrinsic thing doing the moving and bringing about the change would itself not be moved or changed by anything else, and there would be no infinite regress. That mover he called the unmoved mover, or simply God. The second way, or the second proof, deals with causation, or cause and effect, and Aquinas attributed that to God. He reasoned that if there is something like the world, then it logically follows that it was caused by a far greater being beyond it, some sort of uncaused cause, and that he called God. The third way argues from relative or temporal necessity to absolute necessity, arguing that God exists as some sort of necessary being who is not contingent, arguing that the impermanent nature of beings proves the existence of a necessary being who originates only from within himself, or in other words, a being that has necessity of existence in itself. The fourth way argues from degrees of being. Aquinas argued that beings that are more or less limited must depend on that being which is inherently unlimited. He noticed varying levels of human perfection and reasoned that That determines that there is a supreme perfect being that must therefore exist. The fifth and final way or proof argues that natural beings could not have intelligence without it being granted to them by God, thus defending people's ability to naturally perceive proof of God. These famous arguments, first proposed by Saint Thomas Aquinas, have been debated, refined, and built upon all throughout history by various philosophers and way sophisticated religious thinkers compared to Thomas Aquinas himself. But it should never be forgotten how one man chose to go against the norm and kept seeking to uphold a more intellectually fulfilling stance for belief in a God, as opposed to simply being satisfied with revelation or faith. Something every fundamentalist Bible-believing Christian can learn from, especially now that we live in an age of reason and the abundance of information. It is simply not enough to be a Sunday church-going Christian or a Bible-worshipping Jehovah's Witness, so seek to uphold more intelligent reasons for the faith you hold and join the world's greatest debate, God's existence. Thomas Aquinas died on March 7, 1274, at a monastery in Italy, but his name and contribution to philosophy and the academies will forever be celebrated and heavily debated.